In this video, you are going to learn how to request for permissions, and we're going to look at how to request for one permission, for example, for the camera permission, so that we can use the camera in our application. But we're also going to look at how we can ask for multiple permissions at once, which means, for example, the location also, and not just the camera permission. So you see here, I can now give access to one thing. So for example, for the camera, and then also it will ask me for the permission for the location, and here I can say what kind of location I want to give the application, so the precise location or an approximate location. So this will really depend on the kind of app you want to build, but I'm just going to give the approximate location, for example, and I'm just going to give it access while I'm using the app. So you see, permission was denied for location because I didn't give the location, like the fine location, the precise location, but I did give the course location. And we're going to see why that is and how we can set all of that up. So let's go ahead and look into the project that I prepared here. So I have this activity main XML, which just has this one button in there, which just says request camera permission. So if you don't know what's up here, you should definitely jump into another lecture of mine where you learn about XML basics. So here we request for the camera permission, and now inside of our main activity, that's where we are going to request for the camera permission and for the other permissions also. And in order to even be able to request for any of the permissions, I need to define that in the Android manifest. So there is this manifest folder, and there's this Android manifest XML file, and in there you can, on one hand, of course, have all of your activities and define settings for your application and activities and stuff. But what's more important for this video is going to be the permissions that we want to use. So here you need to create this tag uses permission with the Android name and then the permission that you want to use in the application, or that you will require for the application to work properly. For example, I'm adding the camera permission here at this point. So this is the absolute basis. Otherwise, the rest of the code will not work properly. So it's really important that you set that up in your manifest. So let's first just ask for the camera permission. And therefore, I will require something called a activity result launcher. So I'm going to create a new global variable, which I'm going to call camera result launcher. And it will be of type activity result launcher. So you see, you need to pass what kind of launcher it will be. Well, it will be passed by a string. So now we can define this here directly, and I'm going to register for an activity result like so. And here I can pass the activity result contracts like so, activity result contracts plural, where I then request for permission. And here at this point, I can now say whether it's granted or not. So here we're passing the register for activity result, which will return an activity result launcher. So we can now say if it's granted, so is granted. Well, based on what we get there, we can now work with it. And by the way, this is a little confusing here. We need to make sure that we have the closing bracket up there. Okay, so we're calling this register for activity result, and we are passing the activity result contracts request permission method, which we then use a lambda here where we know whether the permission was granted or not. So this is just the form which you need to follow here. All right, so if it's granted, I can now go ahead and check. So if granted, or if is granted, to be precise here, then I can go ahead and display toast. So I'm just gonna display toast saying, hey, permission granted. Okay, very simple. Let's import toast here as well. Okay, permission was granted. And otherwise, I know that permission wasn't granted. So here, permission denied for camera. Okay, so this is our camera result launcher. This is how it works for one particular permission that you can ask for. And now, inside of our onCreate, we actually need to launch this thing, right? In order to launch this thing, what I'm going to require is going to be my button. Okay, so here in my activity main XML, I have this button with an ID of button camera permission. So let me find it via its ID. I'm not going to use view binding here. I'm going to keep it super simple. So here, val button camera permission will be a button and I will find it by its ID like so, and r.id.button camera permission. So this will be of type button, so I need to import button. So now I have the button and I can use the button camera permission set on click listener here in order to say what should happen once we click on the button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check for the version that we are running here, because if I'm using an older Android version, I want to treat this thing differently. So here version.sdk_int. So I'm checking for the Android version that somebody's using with their phone. And here I'm comparing it to be build.version codes and codes.m. So if you're using Android M or newer, then run the code that I'm going to run, because I'm not going to run this permission code for older versions. There you would need to run different kinds of request code, but usually this should be fine. So we're just double checking whether we're really using a phone that has at least Android M. And I think Android M was something like 4.1 or whatever, like super old version. And here we also need to check if should show request permission rationale is true for our particular manifest that we're, or manifest.permission that we're looking at. .camera. Okay, so here permission, and you see manifest is fine, but permission is not fine. And that has to do with the permission that was automatically added being the wrong permission import. So by default, Android Studio thinks it's a good idea to add this manifest, but actually we need to use the other one. So delete that entry and go to import and then select the Android version here. So you will see that now it's going to be this Android manifest. So import android.manifest. And now we can actually do a check here, or actually run the code that we want to run. So I'm checking whether I want or what I should show request permission rationale, which means that if, for example, the application doesn't have access to the permission, then it should show why it should use this application. And I'm going to create a little alert dialog here. And this alert dialog will basically just display that I want to have access to a permission or the application won't work properly. So this will just be a method that we're using here that we create, where we have a title that we pass and the message that we pass, and then we create an alert dialog using a builder. And this builder will reset the title, the message, as well as the positive button, in this case just the cancel button, and what should happen once this button is clicked. And we're just saying dismiss should be executed. So we're just saying, okay, if the user presses on this cancel button, then dismiss the dialog. And of course we need to create this dialog as well as show it. So that's what this show rationale dialog method will do for us. So here, what I'm just gonna say is that I would like to show the rationale dialog with a little title as well as a message. So let me put that in here. So the title should be permission demo requires camera access, and the message should be camera cannot be used because camera access is denied. So this is something that I want to display to the user as a little dialog if I'm trying to access the camera feature and it just doesn't work. Okay, so now if that's not the case, and I should not show the rationale, then I'm going to launch for the camera result. So camera result launcher, launch with the permission that I'm looking at. So manifest dot permission dot camera. Okay, so at this point we can test our application, because in the onCreate now we have this button, and once we click on the button we request for permission, for the camera permission in particular. So let's run the application and click on the button. You see the permission request comes up, and let's not allow it, and you see permission denied for camera. Now let's request for camera permission, and you see permission demo requires camera access, camera cannot be used because camera access is denied. Okay, so basically this condition here is met, which is why the rationale dialog is being displayed, because we don't have access. So here we're just checking, do we have not access, so to speak. And if we don't not have access, so to speak, or we weren't denied before, then we run into this else block where we say, okay, then please ask for permission. Okay, so this is where we're doing it. And then accordingly, you would of course launch the camera then if you have the right to use the application. Okay, so here camera result launcher, which is this camera result launcher that we created. So now unfortunately I will not have access to the camera permission. So how can I manage that? Well, I can go to my settings, and let me just go to the app settings. Here, settings, and search for permission. And then you can go for camera permission controller and search for the permission demo here and allow only while using the app, for example. Okay, so now if I go to my permission request, you see permission granted for camera. So now I granted it outside of the application. Of course, I could have alternatively just deleted this permission. And let me see if that's the right one. I'm going to delete both. So the one that I had prepared as well as the one we just built. So here, app info, uninstall, and then reinstall by rerunning. And now request for permission. And now this time we're going to allow it. Permission granted for camera. Okay, so you see, this is how you can test it. But basically, at this point, I can use the camera functionality of Android and use it in order to, well, get an activity for result and get the image back that the user has taken, for example, with the camera. So that's how we can ask for one particular permission. And just quickly about this permission rationale. Here the system automatically checks if the permission exists, right? And if it has been denied, this will be activated to show the educational message about your app explaining why the permission is needed. And Android recommends it as the right way to check for permission. So if permission has not been requested before, then this code here will be executed. Okay, so now let's see how we can ask for multiple permissions. Therefore, we need to make a change to this part here. Actually, let me reduce it to the smaller part here and just duplicate it. And instead, I'm going to use camera and location result launcher. So this will also be an activity result launcher, but this time it's not going to just have a string here, but an array of strings. So array of string. And then accordingly, we need to make a change here as well, because we are still registering for activity result, but we're not requesting for one permission, but we request for multiple permissions. Multiple, and I need to close here with another arrow, I believe, like so. And accordingly get rid of this arrow. So here we can now request for multiple permissions, like so. But now things are changing. So we are asking for multiple permissions, and we don't get is granted now, but what we do get is, if we look at it, we get a mutable map. So it will be the mutable map now, and we can give it a name, and I'm going to call it permissions. Okay, so based on the permissions that I am given now, I want to go through all of them with a for each loop. So here, with this for each, how I'm going to do it is, well, here I get another mutable map with a string and boolean value, which is basically going to be, well, the string will be the key and the boolean will be whether we have access or not. So the val permission name will be it.key. So this it, that is this mutable map with a mutable entry. Okay, so this will be the permission name, and then we have this is granted, which will be it.value. So these two values here, these two variables, will now contain, on one hand, what is the permission that we requested for example, the camera permission, and this one will hold the value whether we were granted this permission or not. So now we can check if is granted is true, then we check for the permission name, because we don't know which permission was granted, because it could be that we have the permission granted for the camera but not for the location, or for the location but not for the camera, or for both of them, or for neither. So we have all of these different options. The options are limitless. So we can now go ahead and use the permission. We can check if we have access to the find location. So why find location? Well, because I also want to have the location of the user, right? And as I said earlier, if you want to get access to the location, you need to add you need to add this permission in the Android manifest file as well. So here I'm going to go access for find location. I'm going to search for that. And then while you are using locations, you should also access the course location. So add this into your manifest as well. This is just something about locations, because if you don't get the exact location, you maybe at least get a rough location, which will give you the access course location. Okay, so we're checking if the permission that was granted is the access find location. If that's the case, then I'm just going to display a toast saying, hey, the permission was granted for the location. And otherwise, so if it wasn't the permission that was the access find location, here of course I could also use an else if statement and ask for the permission name specifically again. This would make sense if you're asking for multiple permissions here. And in this case, I do know that it will be the camera that was granted. Okay, so if it wasn't the access find location that was granted, it will be the camera that was granted. Even though we have to be careful here, I will say why in a second. But generally speaking, this is how it would work. So that's how it works for our if the permission name was the access find location. So then if we are in the else block here, and it's fine to open it, but I think it's more readable. So here we are inside of this else block of this is granted. So here, if it was not granted, then we know that the permission that we asked for was not granted. And here we need to do the same check. So we check again for the find location, and we know that we were denied the location as well as denied the camera. So in the else block, okay? So this is a for each loop, right? It goes through all the permissions that were granted or not granted. And depending on whether it was granted, it will run into this if statement. And if it was not granted, then it will run into this else statement. So it will run into this else block with all of its beautiful statements, or in our case, just toasts that we're going to use here. Okay, so now accordingly, I will need to make a change to my on-click listener here. So instead of just using camera result launcher and launch it, I'm going to use my camera and location result launcher. And here I need to pass an array of permissions and not just one permission. So I can just go ahead and create an array of the permissions that I want to use. In my case, it will be the permission camera. And that's like this, camera. Well, I need to write it manually, I guess. And then separated with a comma, I add the second permission that I want to add here. So manifest dot permission dot and access find location. Okay, so these are going to be the two permissions that I'm asking for. You could of course add another one here and so forth, but I'm just going to go with 2. Okay, so at this point we should be able to run it and ask for multiple permissions. But before I do that, let me uninstall the application real quick, because I want to show you how it looks from scratch. Okay, so now let's run the application and request for permission. You see it asks for the camera, so I'm going to say okay. I'm going to give you the permission, and then I'm going to give the precise permission while using the app, and you see permission granted for location, and then just a second later permission granted for camera. And now if I run it again, it will just display those permission details. So now we know we have permission, and we can go ahead and use those permissions in our application. So now the thing is that I could also run into this weird situation. Let me show you where I uninstall this application real quick. Uninstall. and then run the application again, because here I'm accessing the find location or checking for the find location. But what if I was given the course location and not the find location? And the course location, let me show you, is actually this part here, this approximate. This is the course location. So this precise here is the find location, and this one will be the course location. So let's select the approximate here, and then you say while using, and you see permission denied for location, even though we have access to the location, but not to the find location. So we could be more precise here, saying permission denied for find location. Okay, and this else if could be the, well, maybe a little challenge for you. Pause the video and adjust this else if block here for the course location as well. Okay, so I hope you tried it. And how I'm going to do it is I'm going to add the course location here, the permission, and this one will be denied for course location, and in the else block it will just be the camera. Okay, so here camera, and then accordingly we will need that in the top part as well here, this else if block actually for our granted location. So here I'm just going to put it in here, permission access course location. If that was the case, then permission granted for course location, and accordingly of course this else block here will be given like so. Okay, that's how you would solve all three options, but that's pretty much it. Accordingly, of course, yeah, you should add here the course location as well. So here manifest permission dot course location. And now actually I've never tried it this way. Let me try it. If I will get asked for permission twice. Let's run it and see. Or like 3 times actually. So ask for permission, allow, and now precise, allow, and that's fine. Yeah, it still works. So it gave me the permission granted for the find location, but not for the course location. Okay, cool. That's it for this video. Now you have an idea of how to use permissions. See you in the next one.